Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm bringing you another 8 that are great, and this time we're going to be looking at some science/biology books. So I have been devouring pop science at a rate that is pretty incredible in the sort of 2 years I've been off, alongside my studying of veterinary nursing, which is naturally going to have a lot of biology in it. So I've got a collection of 8 books that I think are really great that are on like a science biology slant today, and then I will be doing another 8 that are great in like a couple of weeks time that will cover the other half of the science books that I've been reading, because I've been getting through so many. So if you are a science fan in the form of chemistry or physics, this is not going to be the video for you, but if you like yourself things that are squishy and gushy and gross, definitely stick around. So the first book I need to talk about is Life at the Extremes: The Science of Survival by Frances Ashcroft. This is a really wonderful book that is looking at what happens to the human/mammalian body when it is pushed to the extreme. So we are talking high altitude or really intense deep pressure. We're talking, you know, really extreme hyper or hypothermia. We're talking what happens if you deprive it of water, and it really goes into the intricate details of what's happening on a biological level, but then also gives examples of when this might be occurring. So for example, the hypothermia one and the altitude sickness go quite nicely together. You talk about sort of mountain climbers and things like that. It's got loads of detail, is really interesting, and has like lots of little snippets, and the fact that it's sort of broken into the different sections means that at no point does it become particularly bogged down. It also, because of it, references specific instances where something has gone wrong, for example like some diving problems or caving issues or the like Dyatlov Pass incident. So it gives you a really nice sort of list of things if you are interested in using it as like a jumping ground to find podcasts or other books in the area. It's a really good example of that. So fantastic read, one of my favorites of 2021. Another book that I had really good fun with is Aroused: The History of Hormones and How They Control Just About Everything by Randi Epstein. This one is quite fun to read out in public because people just see the title and assume that you're reading something a little bit filthy, but you're not, and I will have filthy book recommendations coming in a couple of weeks time because I have been reading loads of dark romance as well. So this book is, as the title suggests, a history of hormones. Hormones play a huge part in our overall health and like body systems, and this book is a lovely history going back from like their first discovery all the way through to where we are with modern day, and like how we understand them now, and how advances in science in general have allowed us to first discover that they were there, and then be able to measure them in more and more detail, and in doing so how that has then unlocked our understanding of various different diseases. It's got some lovely sort of heartwarming anecdotes about the scientists who have discovered things, which is always my favorite kind of part of history of sciences, as well as you getting the actual like technical detail. You get all of the kind of peripheral social stuff as well. So for example, one that's really stuck in my mind, even though I read this like over a year ago, is Dr. Cushing, whose first name I can't remember. It's either Harry or Henry or Harvey, something like that. He did loads of research into the brain and the various glands in the brain that control hormone release, but his work was lost for a while, and then it became this like dare hazing type thing if you're a medical student at, I think, Harvard, but possibly not, like one big American university where he was based. You would go down into the basement where there was all these like creepy skulls that had been, and like brains that had been preserved in formalin, and you would go down and like see how long you were willing to spend there as part of like a hazing ritual. And then one of the students was like, well, what the hell are these things? And it turned out to be like Dr. Cushing's long lost work, and then it inspired like a load more research into the area. So I just love those kind of weird quirks of science where we're still ultimately humans and things get misplaced or lost or not taken seriously at the time. And yeah, the endocrine system is so cool. So this is a really fantastic book looking at it, and really like sets it in kind of a framework, and so many of the people in this then go on to have disorders named after them. So it was quite fun to be reading about Dr. Cushing when we treat patients with Cushing's disease. So like that was fun for me. Fun might be the wrong word for that. Interesting for me. One shouldn't say fun when treating animals with diseases, should they? Another one that is incredibly timely and very interesting is Infectious Pathogens and How We Fight Them by Dr. John Tregoning. Yeah, why not? This was actually written around COVID and looks at our immune system in more detail and looks at, well, first of all, how does our immune system work? How do we get active and passive immunity? But then also, how does it fight specifically bacteria, viruses and fungi like protozoal? But each chapter has a little bit of a brief that kind of tells you what's going on at the time and like tracks COVID as it happens, because this was written within that kind of framework. Not many people have been talking about this. I think it got lost in the sea of like so many pop science books about COVID that came out sort of the like mid 2001 kind of time, probably even earlier than that. But this one I really like because it just uses COVID as a jumping off point to talk about the immune system in general. So whilst it is good to have it grounded in something that obviously is incredibly prescient and sort of still very present for us, it gives it a much broader context. And the immune system is wild. Like, it is so complicated and so cool in equal measure. It gets a little bit more techie than some of the other books. You definitely are going to be thinner on the ground for the history of science and a lot more about the technical detail of the biology, but it is totally approachable even if you've not really studied it in any detail. I read this before we were talking about immunity at all. It's completely like accessible and really cool as a read. It's one that I would like to reread because I think I would gain more second time round, knowing a little bit more, but still totally worth the first time round. Then we have an iconic classic, of course she was going to feature on this list, and that is Gulp by Mary Roach. Mary Roach is the queen of pop science. She's so good at picking a topic and then each chapter is focused on a different aspect of this topic. Gulp is not my favourite of hers. It is looking at the digestive system. It's going from our mouth all the way through to the back end and kind of covering all the different details in there. I prefer some of her other books. I don't think this one was as strong for me, but it's still a slam dunk because it's a Mary Roach book. So it's kind of, you know, it's like, oh no, it's only like 4.5 stars rather than 5. Oh no. Really, really interesting. Standout one for me was the chapter about Elvis and his megacolon and how him dying on the toilet is actually kind of a medical tragedy rather than it being the really funny thing. But yeah, just classic quintessential Mary Roach content, lots of funny asides, focus on the gross bits, good detail in the science but not too overwhelming, lovely dotted around, lots of human interest stuff. So she's fantastic and I really need to do a video about her and her entire back catalogue if I haven't already. If I have, I will link it because I've genuinely forgotten what I've made on this channel, and if I haven't, I plan to do that at some point soon. The next one I wanted to talk about is in a really similar vein to Mary Roach. If you like that kind of singular chapter focuses on a different aspect of one overarching theme, style of science writing, rather than these more like, we start with the history and we work our way forward to modern day. So shall I tell you about the book rather than just prattling? And that is 9 Pints by Rose George. This is a journey through the mysterious, miraculous world of blood. Blood is wicked. It is so important, clearly, for our bodies, but it's also just fascinating the kind of place it holds socially and culturally. And this book covers a bit of both. So like I said, each chapter, different aspect of it. And I really, really enjoy this book. There's a bit about the use of medical leeches, which is really interesting and kind of has a conversation about old medical techniques compared to new and how we can still learn things from sort of ye olden days. There's a really great chapter on haemophilia and factor 5 or factor 7 and the HIV crisis and the way that that changed how we deal with blood transfusions, blood donation and things in that area. There's also some lovely chapters about social and cultural implications of how we handle menstruation and period blood. Very interesting there. And then there's a really, really great section at the end which is all about like shock rates of fluid therapy and how we handle major traumatic traumas that happen to the body and sort of how paramedics are trained and things. So you really get like a lovely range of different areas about blood and it is so much fun. So yeah, would totally recommend this one. Probably one of the standout reads from this list. If I'd say read only one, I genuinely think it might be this one. One that is quite a quick read is Your Brain Explained by Marc Dingham. This is a look at neuroscience and each chapter focuses on a different part of the brain. It gives you a really interesting case at the beginning that highlights when this part of the brain goes wrong and then it goes into more detail. It's an incredibly accessible book about neuroscience. Like, I know fuck all about neuroscience. It's not something that we do as a veterinary nurse. It's not really touched on in vet med in particular detail. But this one is just, yeah, really, really cool, really detailed, but like I say, completely accessible, and you can really feel Marc's passion coming through. You can tell that this is such a like pet fun subject matter for him, and like all of these books, the authors are generally quite passionate, but like you can just feel it from Marc more in the way he's writing. It's really difficult to explain exactly why, but like there was just an energizedness to his writing, and his stuff is really lovely because he also has a YouTube channel which is called something like 5 Minute Neuroscience. I will link it down below, but it is incredible at breaking down the concepts, explaining them. It's got lovely little like diagrams and things moving across the screen, and it just makes these incredibly complicated ideas really easy to kind of get your teeth into and understand. And brains are wild, like completely wild, so totally check that one out. If you want to go down more of a history road, because I know a lot of these haven't been particularly history of science focused, a classic fantastic read is Paul Craddock's Spare Parts, and it must be good because I bothered to buy it on hardback, and I don't tend to buy hardbacks. This is the surprising history of transplants. It talks about blood transfusions, goes all the way through to like the first heart transplants. Transplants are awesome, and this book is so cool looking at, it's a lovely snapshot of history of medicine and like history of our understanding of our anatomy, because like some of the early blood transfusions that they were trying to do was just to prove that the circulation even existed, because we were at a point in history of medicine where that wasn't a foregone conclusion. We weren't doing autopsies on cadavers, and the four humours were still very much the vibe, and this idea of like lots of tiny interconnected tubes that feed blood everywhere was not really a thing. So that is just cool in itself. It talks about human transplants, animal transplants, both like animal to animal and animal to human and human to human, goes into loads of detail. Did you know they tried to inject dogs with milk at one point? It didn't go very well. No one's really surprised. But then they did it with broth, and that worked a bit better, which is very impressive. And like it talks about the first blood transfusion dog to dog, which didn't work because of the fact that the blood clotted, but they thought it worked, which meant that it proved circulation, which is a good thing, because if it had worked, they hadn't typed the dogs because they didn't know about blood typing, because they didn't even know about blood circulation at that point, so why would you know about blood typing? So if it had worked, it probably would have refuted the concept of circulation, because one of the dogs probably would have died. So it's one of these lovely examples, and the book is filled with all these kind of examples of like the right conclusion from completely the wrong evidence, and how difficult it is to progress in science when you don't have a more detailed picture, because things can go wrong, not because your initial proof that you were trying to prove was incorrect, but because there's some other factor that's screwing it up behind the scenes that you're not even aware of. I hope that made sense, but like I bloody loved this book. Do check it out. Don't know if you can tell, but we're just generally psyched about the science reading at the moment. I've had such a good time with all these books. The final one I'm only going to briefly touch on because this video is already climbing up with the minutes, and I promised myself I'd keep these shorter for editing reasons, but also because I fully intend to do a like 2-book bigger review of this one and this woman's earlier work, and that is The Facemaker by Lindsey Fitzharris. She's also the author of The Butchering Art, which is an iconic history of science book, of which, like I said, book review of the two of them will be going together. But this is a look at one surgeon's battle to mend the disfigured soldiers of World War I, and it is basically a look at, his name's Harold Gilly? Did I get that right? Harold Gilly, look at that. Maybe that means that Mr. Cushing was Henry. Who can tell? So he is like the grandfather of facial reconstructive surgery. It was at a time, World War I, we had a lot more violent injuries that people were able to live through, and medicine had reached a point where people weren't going to die from them, but then we then had to deal with the fact that their faces were a mangled mess. And so he has really pioneered some incredible work in the area, and it's a look at that, and then a look at the other advancements that were happening along the same kind of time and how it all kind of came together. Some incredible photos, some incredible stories, and it also talks about the people around who were kind of doing the holistic supplementary treatments of things like prosthesis and helping to patch holes that weren't necessarily going to be able to be filled from a surgical perspective. I will go into more detail in my other review, but Lindsey Fitzharris is an absolute slam dunk. The Butchering Art's incredible. This one's incredible. I love all of her stuff. She's an auto-bio author now. The girl can't miss. Wonderful book. So yeah, that is 8 really great science, biology, history of science books. Like I said, I've got another one of these coming out fairly soon with another great 8 titles. If you've read any of these, please let me know your thoughts down below. If you have any recommendations for history of science, pop science books, I'm always here for it. And I do have another video from a very long time ago that is about science biology books that I will link in all the various places that people link things. because that one is bizarrely popular on my channel compared to lots of my other content, and has some really great books as well, but from way before I even got into science in general. So I hope you're having a wonderful reading week, and I will chat to you soon. Bye!